You want me to just go straight to questions from the audience? So the way we're going to do it this time is we're just going to go straight to questions from the audience. So are you prepared for that? Oh, I love it. It's always just one hand, and they're very fast. Good job.
I just had a question that is reflecting in part the presentations today, but also I'm not sure to what extent people were here yesterday, but I have a question that has to do with the sort of effectiveness of the practices that you're talking about in relation to the sort of political processes and institutions, and in a few cases, like in the case of A.L. Wiseman, I always thought that his work was very effective as a sort of exposure of things that hadn't really been part of public knowledge, what it means to settle, what's the border mean. In the case of Trevor Pegland, the sort of exposure of these sites that just are not known play a similar role to sort of reporting. But many of the cases yesterday, I felt like the rhetoric of the work didn't really correspond to the actual potential effectiveness of it. So my question is, how do you see your work, and maybe you could critique the way in which other presentations, other work could or could not be effective in relation to the thing that they're talking about.
Anybody want to critique yesterday?
I'll just throw some basic ideas out there, and then we can kind of hear different people talk about it. But I get nervous about this question, actually, because the reason I get nervous about it is that I'm not sure that cultural production needs always to be a means-ends kind of thing, right? And I think that it is helpful to just generate cultural vocabularies that we can use as reference points, and maybe in some kind of abstract way that can allow us to think new thoughts, say new things, or do new things, like reconfigure the earth in various ways. And so I in general, I'm very wary of asking cultural production to have kind of direct effects on society or the institutions that we live in. Having said that, I think also that is related to questions of form, in a way, in the sense that if you're writing a book, or you're giving a talk, or you're putting something in a museum, or you're creating a space, there's certain things that certain forms can do, and there's other things that forms can't do. You know, a lawsuit can do certain things, but it can't do other things. So when we're talking about big questions about, is Eyal, solving the crisis in Palestine? Well, is contributing to that, but none of this stuff happens in a vacuum, and I guess those kind of one-to-one relationships can be tricky, and those are something that have to come out of the particulars of various investigations and projects themselves, I think, rather than a kind of all-encompassing approach.
Maybe just briefly, I think that there is an interesting moment, kind of to take a sort of a positive cue from this question, when diagnostic or means of representation of a conflict or exposure are shifting from one domain, let's say, the art, the gallery, these kind of events, into another. You mentioned a legal court, no? And of course, your work has, some samples from your work have been used legally, right? And of course, it is not, there's never a kind of a full translation of the complexity of its presence and its effect in one domain to the other, but I'm actually very much interested in those moments of crossing, when a piece of work shifts from the gallery into a kind of a political arena of discussion, right? When a form of reading becomes a claim, right? Articulated as a political claim, or for, in kind of in a ways, in really, again, there's no big claim for massive form of, kind of effect. But I think that we did find in Decolonizing Architecture Institute a way to use architecture as a mean of entering the political process in a different way. And sometimes you see it when you take a model and you put a model in the middle of a political or legal discussion, and you see how sets of relations are actually changing the minute that you put it on the table. Because, people like models are like reduced worlds under control, no? And they're like toys. And all of a sudden, a kind of a discussion that was frozen into some kind of political, ideological, rigid position is kind of opening up in different ways. So I find somehow that I'm interested in the shift of the image from one domain to the other and seeing exactly what it does very differently in each one of those, the legal, the political, the art, the cultural one, the educational. And it does something very different. It completely changes. But it also questions those thresholds between those epistemic or other domains. So.
I think that was really clear in the presentation that you gave as well about how...
Trevor, you're going to have to use the mic. Everyone's got to be good with the mic.
Yeah, mate. I think we saw this kind of dynamic of these shifting languages and meaning, the shifting kind of political possibilities that went along with the very subtle changes in the language or in the exhibition that you showed, and how that was part of an overall changing of the world in various ways.
I think it's always changing. Everything is always changing, depending on the situation. And so I think even, the Harold Fletcher exhibition, I actually have a great deal of problem with. But it also opened up a different kind of dialogue that's taking place. And I think that's what it's about. It's not about how effective it is, but it's always generate discussion, more discussion, and it open, more to kind of access to more people about it.
Let's see if we can take another question here. Oh, okay.
Well, this is quite related to the discussion, but I wanted to flip it the other way around. To what extent do you feel, and by the way, fabulous session. We've been around the world. Thank you very much. How do you feel that your work is diluted by being put in an art environment, which is the opposite of what we were just discussing?
You guys feel that way? Sean, Phil, Regine? Do you feel your work is like diluted or gets less interesting as it goes into an art context? Does it get less interesting? Does the work suffer from an art context?
I always say that a gallery is the only place where you can give away free beer and nobody comes. If you gave away free beer on a Friday night at a train station, there would be a riot. But the exclusion and the exclusivity of the white cube and the logic which it proposes, which aims to keep people out in the same way that a designer clothes shop aims to select a certain kind of client, is something which is endlessly difficult. I'm not saying it's also, I think with work which is made within the social terrain and within the social field, that each encounter also forms a part of the artwork, and the invitation to different groups and different communities to step into another world, as complicated as it can be, is also one which can be mutually pleasurable. And so the focus of the white cube, which exacts itself in a specific way in order to prop up certain forms of expression and lend a certain ideological and commercial function to them, is beyond dispute. But I also see the point in also having a representational outcome to a discussion at times. And I think that with the effectiveness or efficiency argument, I mean, that's, you know, trying to create a performance-related pay kind of system towards, or the efficiency of work when it operates in a different domain, really. It operates in a domain which proposes intellectually an idea and opens out into the world. I don't think often it applies to an artwork which has no obligation to tell the truth or to point in a certain direction. The artwork itself has none of these obligations and should refuse it in many ways. Sorry, I do witter on once to start. Oh, sorry.
Okay, I'll take another question.
Oh.
Unless you wanted to, you guys okay with me moving on? Okay.
Just going on.
Just like to, oh, Deborah, you got it, good. I'll hide.
Thanks. So you've all spoken extensively about the new modes of spatiality that have been engendered by late capitalism, but I was just curious if you could speak a bit more about the modes of temporality, the new types of emergent time or ways of experiencing time that you see happening, both as their sort of use as a system of control, but also their potential in terms of resistance.
I think the microphone's in front of me, so I have to deal with what... I mean, I guess in terms of a practice, you know, it's interesting to try and deal with this idea of temporality, because I could go into theory mode and try and call upon Deleuze or Virilio or whoever has tried to inform me about time through text, but then to kind of be in an area like I was and have some sort of empirical observation of this technology and what it was doing and how it was relaying images back to people and also becoming highly problematic. I felt like I was in this kind of area where there was like a barrage of vision being transmitted instantly, and I'm not sure if it was altogether good. You know, I was kind of very critical of that. But in terms of like resisting or questioning, this is a big thing. I'm not sure what my part was exactly, other than looking at the kind of micro-politics of what was happening, people's bodies in that space and how they were relating to each other on a personal level with this technology that was manipulating their kind of temporal spatial relationships. So it was an interest to me, but not maybe too theoretical in a sense. It was kind of dealing with the kind of reality of these people trying to overcome some problems with technology and its manipulation of time. I'm not sure if that answered it too well.
Yes. Is there a question? Okay.
Hi, I actually have a question about access in general, both intimate and political. And Regina, your work is about access in a way, but it's very personal. And I'm curious how the Australian government, say, let you in, Sean, to the military, because I'm not sure the US military would. And just to talk about even just access at a broader level.
I think that's for you.
Yeah, like...
Oh,
both the government and access and culturally, like globally speaking, we're sitting in the US, but is it different to allow access into spaces and other secret locations or those questioning places of political versus personal?
Okay, do you want me to answer this one? Is this, do you want to go for it?
Bueno, me estoy perdiendo un poco con tanta información y con tanta traducción simultánea.
I'm getting a little lost with so much information and so much simultaneous interpreting.
La pregunta es, ¿el acceso de quién? ¿Del público o el acceso del artista?
The question is access, whose access? Access of the artist's access? Access, audience access? Who are you talking about in regards to access? Los dos.
el artista tiene la obligación de encontrar el acceso, ¿no? Su
The
trabajo
artist-
es investigar.
The artist is obligated to find access. The artist is obligated to do research, right?
Y mientras más difícil y más cerrada esté la puerta, más interesante es el trabajo del artista.
And the bigger the door and the harder the lock, the more interesting that research becomes for the artist.
Claro, y cuando tú estás trabajando con temas que tienen que ver con un sesgo político,
And when you're dealing with subject matter that has to do with political bias,
la puerta de acceso es como una cuestión es primordial.
the access door is like a first tier issue in terms of priority.
Porque lo que uno está intentando como artista es entrar por esta puerta por la que ya otros han entrado.
Because what you're attempting as an artist is to come through this door which other artists have already walked through.
Pero encontrarle a la habitación o al espacio que está dentro otra perspectiva.
But find another perspective to that space or to that room that you're entering into.
No importa qué tanto se haya hablado, se haya demostrado, se haya hecho sobre tal o cual asunto.
Doesn't matter how much it's been taught, such and such a topic has been talked about or represented or what's been done in regard to that subject matter.
El mundo está hecho de tal forma que siempre van a haber pequeños escondrijos, pequeños secretos que son los más interesantes, a los cuales uno debe buscar el acceso obligatoriamente.
The world is constructed in such a way that there are such cubby holes and niches that it's your obligation, and it's so much more interesting to find your way, and you're obligated to find those nooks and crannies.
Y ahora la pregunta sobre el acceso del público me confunde un poco porque no entiendo acceso a tu
No.
obra, acceso a entender el contexto de tu
The
obra.
question of audience access, I'm not sure, I'm a little confused whether it's audience access or the audience's access to your work.
Y claro, es una pregunta como muy amplia porque depende
It's like a very open-ended
del
question.
propio contexto del público, de su situación, del interés
Depends
que él tenga,
on the audience,
del
the
país en que
audience's
nació.
context, what country you were born in.
Por ejemplo, una persona que nació en tercer mundo, por ejemplo, yo misma,
For
que nací
example,
en Guatemala,
I
con
was
mala
born
educación,
in Guatemala with a bad educational system. I was born in the third world.
tengo más acceso a la información mundial que una persona que se educa en Estados Unidos a la cual se le niega el acceso
I have
el
more
acceso a la realidad.
access to information than someone who's born and raised in the U.S. who has access to all the information in the world about current reality.
Los accesos, claro, son un reflejo del desbalance del
So
mundo, ¿no?
access, of course, is a reflection of the issue of disparities in the world, right?
Claro, la forma de controlar a las masas, al individuo, es a partir de los accesos.
Control the masses and control the individual through access.
That sounded pretty thorough. I think. Another question here from the audience. I got you up here.
I was interested in the role of perspective in this session and how each of you sort of employ different historiographic methods. Trevor, you use the kind of ultra-objective perspective of the satellite, and Eyal, the building as a document becomes the kind of, provides the historical information. So I was kind of interested in asking you, is it Din? Is that how you say your name? Yeah, I was sort of interested in asking you, you presented a critique of a historiographic method in the Vietnam War Museum, and I wonder if you could talk for a second about other methods you would advance, from your own perspective about, I guess, sort of exploring that subject further, as a predominantly American audience, how we can transcend the limitations of our perspective and engage with that history in a different way.
I think spending time over there would help. Another work that's showing at MoMA right now is it's pretty much interview of the civilians about the Vietnam War, and so they provide very different perspectives on the war. I think my work over the years have been about trying to kind of talk to people that, particularly the civilians, about their perspective. And I think the problem is we rarely hear from them what they think of the war or how they kind of deal with the war. And so that's another way for me, is like trying to get kind of a different way of looking at things. The War Remnant Museum, unfortunately, it's a kind of my friend would joke in Vietnam that it's like a confessional session for the Americans. They come and they don't even have to confess. It's all there for them. And they just sort of kind of come out of it and feeling some sort of, some sort of absolution, some sort of, at least it's guilt a little bit being massaged a little bit. And so it's very easy to kind of accept it and not really trying to look at it critically and trying to go beyond your guilt and look at how complex it is. So I would say try to kind of, it's good to feel guilty, but also try to put it on aside and try to look at through the guilt.
I think that if we, in response to the question of perspective, if we understand really the geography as history in space, there's a way in which the geographer, I mean, if we call ourselves geographers, becomes the historian, right? I mean, you narrate time through its kind of material consequences, no? Material in time. And I think that kind of that kind of speech on behalf of inanimate things, of objects, of spaces, of buildings, no, create a different kind of forum and might also have a different type of claim, different type of political claim. So I'm interested in that agency, and I think throughout our discussions there's a certain agency of the kind of the inanimate geography of the object. That kind of needs to be liberated through not only our reading of it, but it's bringing it into speech, right? Bringing it into to make its claim would perhaps open another form of political arena or forum.
Let's see. Can we get a question from our
internet
friends, antagonists?
Yes. So, how does the panel, if they do, I suppose, how does the panel see their work in the terms of relational aesthetics?
Oh, I heard that in the audience. I heard that. One big psychic yawn. But listen, to say, right? How does the panel see their work in relation to not just possibly relational aesthetics, but also the kind of art historical precedents that have happened previously that may influence, or do you see those as important? Relational aesthetics being one of maybe many, but that one certainly being brought up.
Right, I'll do this one. Okay, well. Was anybody else out on the ale last night? Or was it just me, Sunday morning? Right, so I think for me, there was a series of shows in a small space in Utrecht in the Netherlands called Casco, run by a woman called Lizette Smit, around the same time actually in the 90s, called Real Experiments. And there they tried to cite and shape works which would inhabit the cultural space but not announce itself necessarily as an artwork. And what I think that you saw around that time in the Basque Country, in Bilbao, also in places like Belfast as well, where they took on the social and political terrain, but working in a kind of unannounced or an invitation for an encounter was something which happened outside of the gallery logic. And one of the things which was interesting with relational aesthetics is it seemed guarded by the gallery walls. That is, that the conversations often occurred within the gallery space rather than something outside of it, so that the encounters and the forms of social experiment, which I'm also a great fan of and have a great interest in, but that concrete guardedness seemed to also to be a characteristic of that moment. So in other ways, I think there are histories which became trampled down probably by the writing of that book, or became forgotten in and of other countries and other places and other artists who were already paving the way for that kind of work in the 1990s. Anyone else? I hope that did it in one internet. Thank you.
Can we take another question? Oh, here. Oh, good. Sorry, Deborah. Right.
Hi. A number of years ago, I was sitting in on a conversation in Florida created by new urbanist planners for an African-American neighborhood. And the community kept saying, we want a supermarket. We want a supermarket. And the planner, he kept ignoring it completely over and over again. And his perspective from the point of view of being a new urbanist is it didn't matter if he designed the right physical environment that worked as a kind of pedestrian zone, then in fact the supermarket or whatever else could take place. And so I guess I find interesting in this discussion on geographies, whereas he felt the physical was in fact completely separated from the social. Is that really the position of this group too? Because in effect, none of you have mentioned the physical as a significant factor in relationship to geographies.
Yeah, you want to take that one?
Oh, I think
I can. I think that I don't sort of exclude the physical in my work. In fact, I feel like being in a session on geographies is just kind of one aspect of my work, which is also a lot about body politics. So, but I am interested in this idea of a kind of disruption between a kind of planned physical space and the way that people actually inhabit that. And in my travels in the world, I've seen a lot of planned cities. The capital of Australia is actually Canberra, which Burley Griffin designed from the ground up as a completely Brasilia, Putrajaya in Malaysia. These cities, I'm interested in the details that go on in these kind of planned cities where you'll get people walking and cutting lines through a kind of planned concourse, and I love these lines of desire in a way, that people are kind of hacking the kind of planned city in a sense, just in these little ways, and there's these traces of that which I become interested in as an artist, because it's a kind of trace of people's movement in a planned environment that maybe didn't calculate those people's desires in a sense. So as an artist, I am interested in the physical in that sense.
I think definitely in architecture and to some extent in art, there is that kind of lazy opposition between so-called the formalists and the socialists, no? Those that are dealing with the kind of social implication of space, for whom material reality and form doesn't matter, and those formalists are seemingly kind of oblivious of the social implication. I think it's a completely outdated and old opposition and antagonism. I think in fact politics is matter in movement, is material in space, right? And it is exactly that interaction that I think where our intervention, both in kind of our diagnostic and in our claim, needs to operate. Intervene in the political through the formal.
También me parece que esta pregunta es un poco redundante, porque cuando se habla de arte, el arte tiene que estar sustentado tanto la teoría como la estética.
Theory and aesthetic have to be sustained in art, so it seems to me that this is something of a redundant question.
ninguno de los que está acá sentados en este panel podría llamarse artista si no tiene un trabajo estético que sostiene su trabajo.
None of us could call ourselves artists, of the people sitting here at this panel, if we didn't have an aesthetic underpinning to our work.
El arte es estética, si no nosotros haríamos otra cosa, seríamos políticos, activistas, hubiéramos definido otro camino para
Art
desarrollarnos en el
is
mundo.
aesthetics. Otherwise, we would have defined ourselves as politicians, as activists. We would have found another route to take in this world.
I think we're pretty much out of time. So thank you to the panel. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and when we come back, we'll be diving into governments.
Thank you, everybody.
Muchas gracias.
Double up.